Hi friends! I was always curious about how neural networks work, and this curiosity led me to the field of mechanistic interpretability. While exploring papers and articles from Distill Journal and Transformer Circuit thread, I frequently encountered concepts that sound familiar but I couldn't fully grasp what they mean. So in this video, we are focusing in details on fundamental components like neuron, feature, feature as direction, privileged basis, and superposition. Neuron is essentially a single element of computation that processes input and produces output, typically through a weighted sum of inputs followed by a nonlinear activation function. We denote it with f here, and it can be ReLU, GeLU, sigmoid, etc. Output of the neuron is referred to as an activation. An activation value varies depending on the input. Neuron is considered to be active or fired when its value, activation value, is large, often compared to some baseline. This often means that neuron has found something interesting or relevant to its function in the input. In neural network, neurons are formed into layers, and this is an example of a layer with two neurons, and each activation value of these neurons, they form a vector. And we say that this vector lives in an activation space. In this example, the dimension is 2. In another example of a layer with 4 neurons, the activation space dimensionality is 4D. Mechanistic interpretability field uses inspiration and analogies from traditional software reverse engineering, and it's proposed to think of parameters as compiled programs and activations as variables. As in traditional software, we can only understand the line of code if we understand variables. Same for neural networks, we can only understand parameters, weights, and biases only if we understand activations. The concept of features is surprisingly very hard to grasp. So I'll start with these 3 speculative claims about neural networks that I found in the famous essay called Zoom In, an Introduction to Circuits, written in 2020 by Chris Olah and team in OpenAI. And the first claim here is about features, and they say features are the fundamental unit of neural networks. They correspond to directions. These features can be rigorously studied and understood. So it gives us a start, initial idea. So in order to better get an intuition, let's go through a few examples. So there are multiple papers in Distill Journal that publish the results on the feature visualization and exploration projects. And 2 articles I found very interesting are curve detectors, also written by OpenAI team, and another one is an overview of early vision in Inception V1. So basically, they studied this Inception V1 model that was created by Google in 2014, and they focused on studying these early layers like 0, 1, 2, 3, and 3B. So one very interesting feature they shared is called curve detector. So this is for 10 neurons in 3B layer, this one. This figure illustrates these features, and the feature here refers to the curved edges or boundaries in an input image. You will notice bright and contrasting colors. So let's zoom in. On each side of the curve, this shows that the neuron is looking for color changes along the curve's boundary. So here we have blue color. This is like mix of few, but they're different. Same for this picture, for this neuron here. And curve detectors come in families, with each neuron in the family focusing on the same curve shape but in different direction. So as you can see across neurons, they all in different directions, and they create a family. What's interesting is that these neurons don't care about things like brightness, texture, or color, they only focus on the shape of the curve itself. Researchers also share that the curve detecting neurons can be found in every non trivial vision model they've carefully examined. So, this is aligned with the third claim they made, which is about universality. And they say analogies, features, and circuits form across models and tasks. Another less intuitive feature that they found in the same model, also same layer 3B, is called high-low frequency detector. And it demonstrates an input to neurons that look for low frequency patterns on one side of the receptive field and the high frequency patterns on the other side. Like if we look closer at this picture, this is a high frequency side and this is a low frequency side. So these feature visualization of the neurons is achieved by formulating the task as an optimization problem with the objective to find specific input that causes a single neuron to fire as strongly as possible. This is done by starting with a random image and using gradient-based optimization to tweak the image pixel. There was work done by Anthropic to find features in Claude 3 Sonnet model, and they found very many interesting examples in middle of the residual stream. And one of the examples is shown here. It's a Golden Gate Bridge feature example. And as you can see, it's multilingual and multimodal, meaning it appears both in text and images. These examples might give us a wrong impression that a single neuron is perfectly aligned with a distinct and human understandable feature if someone investigates it deeply, but that's not the case. For example, they also found a polysemantic neurons. So this is an example of a neuron that responds to cat faces, front of cars, and cat legs. So these features are completely not related at all. And they call it a polysemantic neuron, and we will talk about this and why it happens further in this video. Now that we have seen examples of features, we can discuss in details what a good definition for a feature might be. So I found a great article in Transformer Circuits thread, and it's called Toy Models of Superposition, and it's written by the team in Anthropic and Harvard. And it has a section that discusses these different approaches on how to define a feature. So first, they say that it's intuitive to define feature as an arbitrary function of input. However, features have empirically found features have something special about them. It seems like they are fundamental abstractions for reasoning about the data that the model finds useful to perform its task. And another approach might be to think of features as interpretable properties. However, it's very important to allow for features that we humans might not understand. And a good example of it might be an AlphaFold model that discovers some important chemical structure for predicting protein folding and something that we initially didn't understand. So a good definition that authors propose is to define features as properties of the input which a sufficiently large neural network will reliably dedicate a neuron to representing, meaning that neural network is limited by the number of neurons it has, and number of features might be larger than this number of neurons. Therefore, we observe things like polysemantic neurons, and theoretically, there exists a larger neural network that might assign a separate neuron to each feature. There is a hypothesis that features are represented as directions. What does it mean? So let's look at specific example, and this time word embeddings. And famous example by Mikolov show that word embedding space has some special directions that correspond to semantic properties, allowing for arithmetic such as Vector of king minus vector of man plus vector of woman is equal to vector of queen. So let's do this simple arithmetic together so that we better grasp an idea of what the direction is and how features are aligned with it. And in our toy examples, we will create a word embedding space that is two-dimensional. And we have two features here, gender and royalty, and they are aligned with basis vectors. And basis vectors are basically the vectors that span vector space, meaning that every vector in this space can be represented as a linear combination of these basis vectors. In the case of two dimensions, these are unit vectors aligned with x-axis and y-axis. And as for our features, higher values for gender mean that feature value is male, and higher values for royalty mean it's like higher royalty. And we can create a word embedding for man with values 1 for gender and 0 for royalty. For woman, it's the same value for royalty, but it's -1 for woman. And king, it has both features. It's both male and high royalty. So after performing this simple arithmetic, we will get vector values for queen, which is again very logical because queen is both female and high royalty. And in this toy example, we have feature directions aligned with basis vectors. And this is called privileged basis. In real world, though, word embedding space, like in word embedding space, basis directions are not special or anyhow different from any other direction, and this is called non-privileged basis. In the paper, Toy Models of Superposition, there is a section that talks about privileged basis. On the left side, you can see a figure that tells in a non-privileged basis, features can be embedded in any direction. There is no reason to expect basis dimensions to be special. And examples are word embeddings, transformer residual stream. And in a privileged basis, like on the right hand side figure, there is an incentive for features to align with basis dimensions. This doesn't necessarily mean they will. And examples are convolutional net neurons and MLP layers in transformer. In the case where the bases are privileged, researchers call these directions neurons. Often these neurons correspond to interpretable features such as curve detectors. In some cases, these features are not interpretable, like found in transformer language models. In other cases, these neurons tend to combine completely distinct features like cat's face, paw, and front of the car. Why does it happen? We can think maybe these features are somehow connected, or it's just by chance. However, there is an alternative option, and it's a superposition hypothesis. Idea of superposition is that model wants to represent more features than it has neurons. And this hypothesis is very well described in the paper called Toy Models of Superposition from Anthropic that we saw earlier. And so this is the figure. It illustrates the superposition. So it shows us two-dimensional activation space where the model wants to represent three features. And these features are not aligned with the basis because the model embeds more features, right? So what is inevitable in this case is polysemanticity, as we saw with an example of the neuron that has cat's face, paw, and front of the car in it. And so the polysemanticity is illustrated here, and when we want to study the neuron basis direction, we will see actually distinct features combined. And the property that the model exploits to represent more features than it has neurons is about almost orthogonal vectors. That says, although it's only possible to have n orthogonal vectors in an n-dimensional space, it's possible to have exponential of n many almost orthogonal vectors in high-dimensional spaces. So this is an illustration of this. Again, we have an activation space of 2 dimensions, so we expect to have only 2 basis directions. However, model wants to represent 5 features, and it does it using this property of almost orthogonal directions. And what happens here is what is called interference, meaning that in an orange we have an activation vector, and we want to check what features are represented in this activation vector. So we need to project it on each of the features. So of course we can see that this feature is presented. However, the values for other features are also not 0 because these 2 features are not orthogonal. And this is the cost that model pays for the opportunity to present more features. And in the next videos, we will see how sparsity and nonlinear activations help to outweigh the costs and get more benefits of this. This is another very good demonstration of what happens in the superposition. So again, model wants to simulate larger network, where every neuron corresponds to a separate feature. And these idealized neurons are projected onto the actual network as almost orthogonal vectors over the neurons. And the network that we observe, low-dimensional projection of the larger network. And from the perspective of individual neurons, this presents as polysemanticity.